I wanted to draw your attention to an interesting book that one of my viewers advised me to purchase. Here it is. It's available online at the big major online retail book place that does other things as well. And it's called the Common Law Community Training Manual. Common Law. It's fascinating because this is all about the trial by jury and how ordinary people, us, the people, can bring together a court and put on trial those that have oppressed us. Heads of state, people who have perhaps mandated certain medical things that have caused death and complications. And I just wanted to sort of explore some of this with you and tell you about it, because you may want to go and...
So, before I forget, I just wanted to say that Verbs has done another video before this one, and I can't find it at the moment. I'll have to try to find out which video it is. But it's actually talking to a guest, and they were talking about juries. It might actually even be in that video, in the Charles video, with the picture of Charles on with the rights. Edward Fitzgerald. It could be it might be the Edward Fitzgerald video. It could even be the Charles Wells video, possibly. But they were talking about civil cases having juries, not just criminal cases having a jury. They were talking about, civil cases having a jury, although you see in a county court, you don't really have juries, although they have different levels of court. A Crown Court is meant to be higher than the Magistrates' Court. I'm not too sure how a Crown Court figures in with civil cases or not. I don't know whether the County Court, then you go to a Crown Court or higher, because obviously if you have a jury in a Crown Court. But I know for sure that really a lot of... If you have a jury in civil cases... at the outset, at the initial level, you would get a lot of these business claims, business cases, enterprises, all of this hostile takeovers, all of the things that has been happening in the business sector, and the whole area around these oligarchs amounting their masses, buying other companies out, buying people out, fining people, claiming against people, winning legal suits where business law decisions get made as to what means what and who can do what. Kind of like, we've been losing in rights, we've been doing terrible improving the full extent of his rights, We've had, the Max Hill, the Director of Prosecutions, ignored 2 entire acts of law, which I'm going to pull him up on. Whether or not we're going to pull him up on it or not, but he's resigned anyway over other matters. So if you had juries who could potentially be made out of normal people, workers, making decisions on all these enterprise matters and things like that, you would likely get a lot of different outcomes. And the outrage and disgust at all these massive amounts of money that are being passed over, billions on court decisions or so forth. Now, maybe, I'm not too sure how this figures in with the Crown Court. I'll have to check. But, for example, I know that even like if the jury would have decided one way or another way, they likely would appeal and go higher. But the thing is, now you have, the Crown Court is higher up. But on this business track and in business claims and a lot of civil cases, a lot of them are not even really dealt with in the Crown Court, County Court anyway. They go to the Royal Courts of Justice, which is usually justices. They have all these justices making these decisions. And then we find out, things like, many of these justices and even people like, the head magistrate, this Emma Arbuthnot and her husband are meant to be embroiled in all these investments. BlackRock Vanguard, we've got the Prime Minister making money out of investments and then making and changing law, making his money out of investments when, really people who are making decisions in government and commissioning things aren't meant to be making any profits out of it at all. I really think that this area of business, when Verbs was speaking to the guest and talking about juries being actually engaged and used in civil areas of law where they're actually not, I think that it would have shaped the whole corporate and business sector very differently if they would have had juries and been using these juries in the civil area. And could it be possible that the reason that these business and corporate people, particularly when you get a lot of affluent people who are involved in politics, could it have been that they did slowly start to remove these juries from civil cases and basically scrap it or decide not to use it anymore because of the fact that if they hadn't, they wouldn't maybe have been able to get away with what they did and what they built. For example, that Charles Wells program on Verbs when he was in Canada, and he's proved, that a lot of the Canadian institution is not enforceable, and also he's had that Stan, that other guy on there, Stan McDonald. They keep making these cases that Canada's constitution is not very solid, and it was formed through HSBC and adventures, the Royals and their colleagues overseas adventure companies and enterprise companies, and they ended up literally basically just setting their own country up from these enterprises. All those really, really old businesses that constitute many of the foundations of the aristocracy and their circles and all of these big companies and the families, if they would have, why is it why we've still got jury in criminal cases but not in civil when we're meant to have them in civil? And I would say that because there's a lot of money involved in a lot of these businesses and enterprises, particularly overseas, where they're not being judged by their peers, are they? They will be being judged by the workers, the normal people, and they probably would have been absolutely mortified and horrified with all these huge company takeovers and the amount of money at hand, and over technical aspects of law, money, things being passed, even with family disputes, like if you've got two very, very affluent rich people and they separate, get divorced, and then, disputes over the money, juries probably would have been mortified over things like this, like, women splitting up with their husbands and only being with them for, short periods of time, but getting all the money. All those type of things. Just a general, an absolute, abhorrent, disbelief at, how these aristocracy were living and so forth. So, I think that it plays a large role in the greater scheme of things. Why do they keep juries in the criminal courts? Well, they only really use them in the Crown Court, and this is what I would say about that. Through my experience in the legal system, particularly criminal cases or whatever I've been in, the magistrates' court, very few people want to appeal, and very few people have got money to even afford any legal help. It's the magistrates' court is the place where it all happens. It is sort of like the it's like the Football League where you get all the action goes on in there. All of the action goes on in the magistrates' courts, because when you go up to Crown Court, it all gets recorded and you have a jury, and it's all very professionally, supposedly very professionally done. But many people are scared of the Crown Court because you can get a lot more serious convictions. These cases that can be dealt with summarily, by the magistrates' court, people really, if they're going to plead guilty, or, if they want a cheap defence, they just go to the magistrates' court, and there's no jury involved. And they have a recorder, but it's nothing like the complete, full, detailed recordings of the Crown Court, So it is... The magistrates' court, whenever I've been there, it has been a cockfighting ring, a dogfight. It has been not dogfight, but what I mean is it's not very legitimate. It's not very consistent. It's not very trustworthy. It's like going to watch a magician, with a cup and ball trick that they're trying to mislead, trick. All of the procedures are out of order, or you go to a different court. The formation and structure of the courts are, completely different. How they've got, the place laid out inside. It is. And they also like to control proceedings very much, even though if you've got certain rights and privileges and so forth. It is very much like a soccer league, soccer division with their players. They've got players, the clerks, the justices, the police, the Crown prosecutors, even the duty solicitors, whether they even turn up or not, or happen to vanish when you need them, or... the whole thing, and that's the problem. Most people are kind of scared of Crown Court. Although if you've got money, you would go to a Crown Court, and it's dealt with a lot more legitimately. But that's the thing. So you're not actually getting the jury when you need it. With the common people aren't getting the jury in the magistrates' court. They are not getting judged by their equals, really. They're not really getting judged by, their own working class people. So, and this is it. So instead they get judged by these magistrates who don't really necessarily judge it, I don't think, fairly. And it's quite the opposite with civil cases. You see, if on the first court, at the first level of court, the county court for civil cases, without, going up to any flashy fancy courts, you see, if the civil courts would have had jury from the public in there, randomly selected, at the very first entry level, you would get very different outcomes in these business cases and business trials, and divorce cases and all these other things, compared to what's been happening from the justices. So it's almost like it's convenient. Therefore, if you look at the criminal system on the left and then the civil system on the right, to one side, you've got the common people who end up in the criminal court not getting the jury there, so they don't really necessarily get judged by their equals. But then when you've got the civil court, when you enter, you don't have a jury there, but the business class people, conveniently not having a jury there. This is what I'm trying to say. So you've got people who have business are quite well off, and they're going into the county court. And what I'm saying is, it's good for them to not have a jury of the average person, because it helps them with their business, and the justices are getting to decide all these business matters on behalf of the Crown. Whereas with the criminal court, it doesn't work very well for the general public, the working class in the magistrates' court. So it's favourable to not have a jury at the entry level in civil, and it's disfavourable for the public to not have a jury at entry level in the magistrates' court. So it's working for the affluent business holders and working against the common people. Then when you go up to the next level, when you appeal to a higher court, when you've got the Crown Court, it works better for the common person, if they can afford a good lawyer, to go to a Crown Court, because you get a fairer trial, at least if you get a jury, and if it all gets recorded. So if you were to self-represent and you go in with your own law, and you want to go through it with them, all that is completely and totally, the whole thing's recorded. So if they missed anything out or didn't do anything properly, you could really pull them on it, but whereas in the magistrates' court at this shabby level, they can pull every trick in the book at you, and you ain't got anything. Like when Sam Goozy gave me the ticket with the not even the right time on, and when I turned up, they'd already had the hearing, and my lawyer had to go take it in and ask to tell them and complain. And then not long after that, Goozy kind of like left the courts and pursued, climbed further up the ladder to chase the blaze, to get away from the blaze. I'll have to actually. I should have researched the answer to the Crown Court, but even if it doesn't really matter if civil cases are or aren't heard by the Crown Court, because if they are, then they don't need to go. What I'm saying is, you don't really need to go to it as often. If you can get a satisfactory outcome at the county court, you won't need to go up higher to like a Crown Court at a jury anyway in a civil matter. Or if I'm wrong and if it isn't the Crown Court, then even the Royal Courts of Justice or the High Court or whatever. If you are not having a jury at entry level and you're having justices who are representing the Crown, then I think it's hunky-dory for all parties, particularly if it turns out that Charles and Prince Andrew and all these people are involved in this whole military-industrial complex and this overseas thing, and it works out for all parties interested, if those parties are people like Emma Arbuthnot and her husband, and these justices who seem to all have a piece in this investment pie, and now the Prime Minister, making money out of investments in business. Would you want Sunak? Would you want Sunak as one of your justices, at County Court or Crown Court, regardless of whether you've had a jury or not? But it's actually what I really wanted to set for, to put on the table is that I'm glad that Verbs drew this attention to the fact that, you can have or supposed to have a jury in civil and criminal cases, because looking at it and thinking about it now, if we did have juries in civil cases and they phased them out, looking at the whole model of what's been happening, common people getting punished by the law and affluent people making lots of money out of investments, and then this whole thing growing and exploding, overseas ventures and everything, it's really it would have hindered the business class to even get away with what they've got away with now, in all these manner of different sorts of claims over land ownership, money, civil partnerships, all that to do with their lives. It would have hindered them to have a jury in the civil courts. And what's that? But it doesn't help us. It would have helped us a little bit, at least, if we'd have been judged by as equals at a magistrate court level. Because magistrates don't, you see, for example, I don't really want to use the driving case example, but, it's a working class example. Like, when the law says certain things, like if if your employer puts a schedule or whatsoever, and you've got to abide by it, a lot of people wouldn't have been losing their driving licenses when you've got, working class people, not necessarily people who always catch the bus, but, many people drive who are working class as well. I think they wouldn't have convicted half as many people of getting banned, at least, and things like that. They wouldn't have been able to get away with it. The police chiefs wouldn't have been able to get away with it. And really, the police chiefs, they're making you admit guilt anyway and accept the punishment without even going to court half the time. Just admit you're guilty and accept the punishment. These conditional offers and penalty points is getting you to own up to it. From what they've said about these juries, and it's meant to have an involvement in civil cases, the way that they've played it, the government, and set it up, I can see now how we've got into this situation, and I do think that is at least in the whole legal side of it. They wouldn't have been able to do what they've actually done now to us. And look at all the civil cases with the food, all these companies, all this harm that the food's been doing to us. And, like on Russell Brand, that woman, says that the sperm count's dropped by half since World War II. We'd be able to, the thing is, we've got these special courts now where even companies are suing the government for making or changing the law that might affect future profits. If there was a jury in those civil cases, surely, just a minute, we're the electorate, we make up the laws, not these companies are coming and suing people. What do you mean you're suing the government for making the laws? That's my wage there, affecting your future profits. That is the ultimate model. How they've got these shadow courts into place, I don't know. I think that this Matt Kennard investigation, I think that it's almost like they've made themselves their own Inquiries Act to a special court we have for inquiries that you can have with special powers. I think they've created them up for themselves. It's almost like Sunak's, changed the laws to, make him more profitable with his investments. It's almost like he's conjured up these new courts. And by the way, where do these new courts get invented by? How do you even create laws to make the Inquiries Act to have a special court to hear an inquiry? These courts that the governments are getting prosecuted by, if it isn't the government that invents these courts and processes and procedures, then what does? Where do they come from? The Ministry of Justice can't create its own courts. How did Gordon Brown get rid of the Appealite Jurisdiction Act and claim that you can't appeal to the Lords anymore? That's got to play a part in it, because maybe if you've got all these shadow courts, really in the Supreme Court, you can't have a court that's higher than the Houses of Parliament or the judicial authority of Parliament in the Lords. So I don't know how you can say that companies can sue governments and take them to court for making and changing the law, when the penultimate pinnacle of it was meant to be appealed to the Lords with the King, and the King sat there and he's the one signing everything off that gets passed by the Houses of Parliament. So how could these companies, sue them for affecting things that are going to affect the future profits, when the guy who would be the highest place that you go to is the guy who sat there signing it off? If you see what I mean. So, that really surely tells it all. Now, Gordon Brown, this is the thing with Blair now. Now that the cards have been turned over on the table and Blair knows that, we're onto him and, people have, seen what's going on. Now Blair has, shit his pants, and now he's going, no, we need to, do this and do that, and have healthy food out and all this. Well, now that we've clocked him, he's literally, panicked, and now he's, he's claiming all these, he's meant to be turning over a new leaf, which is, but still, not the people deciding, these companies deciding. The other point that I wanted to make, which I do think is valid and worth contemplating, is this whole thing around the platforms. You see, what's happening now, the whole fact that, if you had a jury deciding on civil matters and civil cases besides criminal ones, then that's people making decisions. But what's happened on the platforms is they've given us all these buttons, but they're not. We haven't actually really got any. They're having these admins on groups, and they're just. It's not like a proper jury, because it's actually admins, not the people in the groups who've got these buttons, and we're all ending up actually just blocking each other and banning each other and not tolerating each other. And we're actually, all of the rights and the proper procedures have been undermined. There's no one to make sure that the actual law is used in these groups. Even if you were to think that these groups are like a jury, no one's really properly setting out any rules or enforcing them. They're making all different group rules up, which are completely different, which is like, you might as well go back to Celtic culture of different clans with all different, have different laws in each village, which they're meant to want to scrap that. But it's all under one umbrella of this company policy, the big platforms. Now, what's happening is the big platforms they're pulling stuff and making decisions on things, particularly YouTube, and it's just staff. Staff are doing it. But these are staff of a corporate enterprise, which is directed by and instructed by the corporate enterprise. So it's almost like we're getting judged by a corporate enterprise now. And that's going even further away from the jury, because that's kind of flipped it. And if you think of that relationship, right, you've got YouTube, Google, executives and owners making decisions on us, right? They've got us kind of blocking and banning each other, but without really any real proper law of the country being used or rights enforced. And then they're saying it's all private anyway, and then trying to claim you don't have your rights, if they can get away with saying that. And then it's the corporate entity that's making decisions, overriding the whole platform. It's, really the jury in civil court, the users of YouTube would be basically making the decisions on over Google, over YouTube. If you went to civil court and there was a jury there, it would be more like the users of YouTube's deciding, what was going to happen to Neil Mohan or to Google. But we can't have that, can we? No. In fact, you can't even take them to court. They're immune. So they really are. I think the whole system, the justices, and the whole network of the justices, I think was corrupt anyway over to the business side, and they took away the real right to be judged by your equals, which you're meant to be judged by your equals financially. Because in Magna Carta it says, barons and lords can only be judged by their equals, right? Which I think is really why they scrapped the jury in the civil procedure, because when people start to get more money and get richer, they didn't really want the jury deciding, because they didn't think that they were the equals, right? Because they really wouldn't have been making decisions that were, highly advantageous and profitable to this upper class. But the justices would. That's not to say that. So in a way, really, I think they phased out and scrapped the jury in the civil procedure because they didn't think that the workers were equal to their boss, to the owners, to the factory owners, to the business owners. But we are meant to be their equals. Anyone could open a company or business. If you're not a baron or lord, then everyone's meant to be equal. But that's the thing. They did create this class system And I think that they haven't regarded as equals. You're only really meant to be, the Commons, the House of Commons. But that would mean that if it's the House of Commons and common people, that would mean that, what about Gordon Brown? But then again, Parliament was meant to be, separate and different, wasn't it? It was meant to have judicial authority. Parliament was meant to have judicial powers and authority, but they even scrapped those. That's another power that our elected ministers were supposed to have. That would mean that people like Andrew Bridgen and some of the other MPs who are really, really against what's happening through the pandemic and so forth, they would have had some sort of abilities and judicial authorities and powers to do certain things with what's happening, like with lockdown rules and so forth like that. So I think that it's kind of been set up so it has set up to definitely be a disadvantage to working class people and to be advantageous to affluent people who were. But then even the people out of the affluent people, what's happened is they've all been taken advantage over by these big corporate investment entities who've gradually been buying them all out, and then they've got more financial legal power to fight and win cases, and they've really fought it out in order to achieve this position of this big BlackRock Vanguard thing. And I think that this Emma Arbuthnot and all these other magistrates have been in on it in a way under Charles. Because it makes sense. And even Gordon Brown scrapping that act, that has a lot to do with it. That has a lot more to do with it than you think. And, Gordon Brown might sit there and go, I'm charities, I'm clean. I give to charities. I'm not a con man. Look at my record. All I do is give to charities. Well, you sold all the gold off to people who made a hell of a lot of money out of it. And, now Tony Brown's been pulled up about his war crimes. Gordon Brown is not, he's played a key role in the whole thing. And I don't care how many charities he gives to. A lot of these charities that Matt Kennard has said aren't really that good anyway. And, all this foreign aid is a con. And a lot of the charities, we wouldn't have really needed them. A lot of the problems they're doing is because, of the difference between the classes, So it's a bit of a distraction, where Brown's claiming that he's doing loads of charitable work, and he had good intentions. He's really broken a system where we had a right to hold these people to account in the Parliament with not Supreme Court, in the actual Parliament by a proper legitimate process, and none of this Supreme Court and shadow court business, suing governments and all this and that for changing legislation, when if you're appealing to the Lords, the Parliament, don't change the legislation until it's been put through the Lords. So, it to me, it just seems so obvious, and I think that it is Parliament's fault. I think that it is the British government, and they've all played a part in it. Whether at the time when they were doing these things they didn't really know where it was going, and more grander masters had more grander and longer plans in mind. But I think Brown knew enough, and I think that Brown is a puppet, and unfortunately Blair. But Blair's serious. Blair's still powering on with it now, which means so then if no matter what their differences were, they were both Labour Party MPs, and they've both been Prime Minister within a short period of time of each other. And because Blair's still actively involved in this whole thing, and pushing it all with the World Economic Forum. I think that their team that they had, which definitely was a team, Gordon Brown didn't get kicked out of the party like Jeremy Corbyn, that's for sure. Gordon Brown didn't get thrown out of the Labour Party. Tony Blair didn't throw Gordon Brown out of the Labour Party. Keir Starmer has ejected Jeremy Corbyn. So, as far as I'm concerned, Gordon Brown and Tony Blair were like two peas in a pod. And you can see now that all this Blair, in the shadow, going around from government to government to government and telling, I'm getting paid for, he's a consultant. He's a global consultant for this plan. And if you don't get paid for it, he'll do it for free. I'll do it for free. If you don't do it for, X, million or whatever, it'll do it for free, if you won't pay, if people aren't paying him for it, then he'll volunteer his services. And these governments, Blair is involved in consulting governments and other entities, and these shadow governments are involved in suing them when they don't do what they want. So if you calculate it all out, well, just a minute, isn't the highest court that you could go to an appeal meant to be the Lords? So if these shadow companies and courts were suing governments, including ours, for not making the right decisions in Parliament, then wouldn't the House of Commons just go to the House of Lords to appeal it? Well, they're the ones who they put the legislation through to anyway, to sign it off, if you see what I mean. And on that basis, it seems that Charles is beyond leaders, beyond governments, beyond leaders. Oh, how convenient, Charles! How convenient to be beyond leaders. We've got courts suing the government for affecting future profits. Yeah, it's the government that makes the legislation, and in the government is both houses, and one of those houses signs it off, and that would be the place that you went to for the highest decision of all other possible courts, and it's conveniently been removed from the equation to. The Supreme Court and God knows what else they've got conjured up besides these Inquiries Act, special little courts for special little processes or whatever. And even through the Inquiries Act, though, it's meant to get referred to the High Court, which can get referred higher. It's joke. I don't need to be the Constitution Society or the Democratic Society Jack with a big smile and a big moustache on my face and have read every single literacy work and every poetry book that's been written, to understand the fundamental basis of what they've been up to. This is it. And that, to me now, that really does set the whole thing. Because this all rests on these big entities and companies. We don't really know who owns it. Charles has got all these, wills and stuff that he doesn't really want people to see. Then we've got the fact that the Lords are meant to be the highest court. Blair is involved in all this. It was Blair and Brown who sold all the gold off and then stripped down as highest appeal into that place, which wouldn't only be just for us, that would be for commercial enterprise and possibly the government itself, because Parliament like to go to court sometimes as well. Ministers like to try get court decisions, and also this thing with the whole thing where this whole Swallow Braverman and this whole immigration and the other issues to do with some matters that Parliament wanted to put something through and the Lords didn't want them to put it through, but Parliament managed to get it through. If there was any legal matters around that to be challenged, wouldn't that have been heard in the Lords? So that means that the Lords would have had the last say if there was anything final to be actually challenged about that. You know, if you wanted to legally challenge something through the courts, even, you know, the meaning of the law. When they've made this legislation and you want to challenge the meaning of it, you know, it seems like the Supreme Court with these, you know, 3 justices, it does seem joke in a way. It seems almost like some sort of little corporate enterprise they've set aside, because you're meant to have actually the Lords. It's meant to be the House of Lords, not the Supreme Court. It's meant to be the House of Lords. It makes a difference when it is in Parliament and it is in the Lords, regardless of whether it's a committee or not. I know that the committees have to have at least 3 justices on them, but it's not. It wasn't called the Supreme Court. It was the House. It was the House of Lords. It was Parliament. In fact, because also Charles isn't in the Supreme Court either, and also when you've got really, really serious matters, you don't just want 3, at least 3 of the Lords, minimum on a committee, even if it was a Supreme Court or a committee in the Lords, you want all of them, don't you? When it's something serious and important, you want the whole lot assembled, minus any of them who are being accused or charged with any offences, In fact, that would effectively mean all of them. I think that's what Keir Starmer's wanting to do, scrap the whole thing.